Future Now Show. Brought to you by the Club of Amsterdam.
Hey Futurists, welcome back to the Future Now Show, brought to you by the Club of Amsterdam. We have a great show for you today. Joining me from Colorado is John Best. Hey John. John is a futurist, author, speaker, and podcast host, and CEO of Best Innovation Group, a FinTech firm that focuses on industry-wide code sharing and API prototype development. John is recognized as a forward-thinking thought leader and innovator in the FinTech space with a particular affinity for credit unions. Hi, John. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you for having me. Very cool.
Absolutely. You recently published your new book, Breaking Digital Gridlock, Empowering Credit Unions and Community Banks to Make the Shift to Digital with Minimal Disruption.
Yep.
So what is digital gridlock and how is it affecting the financial services industry?
You know, I thought a lot about that, and in the book I talk about paralysis, right? There's a lot of different paralysis that happens. So I come from an environment where I worked in credit unions for years. And one of the things I noticed was, there was these trends. For example, a project that would literally go on for 18 to 20 months, and what it felt like was, it felt like you were like in a, I would have to drive from Pasadena to Yorba Linda. I don't know if you've ever been to California much, but even though that's a 40-mile drive, which isn't that far at the end of the day, but in California, that's a 2-3 hour trip, especially on the 5. And it would sit in the car, feeling helpless, just cannot move, right there on the 5, smelling the exhaust, and just with a bunch of other people all around me who were in the same sort of mode. And that's where I got the idea of gridlock, because that's what a lot of these projects feel like. And there were a lot of different paralysis that I discovered. There was paralysis of risk, right, where we wouldn't move forward because we were very, very risk averse, and almost to the point of being risk-phobic. There was paralysis of culture. There was concerns around, wow, we just can't handle this, or we don't understand, or our people will never understand it. There was paralysis of process, people sort of hanging on to these processes that were manual, not because they were bad people or they wanted to sabotage the company or anything, but because there just wasn't good communication and understanding around that. And so there was all these paralysis that sort of led to this gridlock. And I feel like everybody has great intentions and they go into this wanting to do something, but you find that over time that paralysis is demoralizing, and it starts to just put you back right where you were, because the easiest thing to do is just to sort of turn on the radio and ignore it and sit in the gridlock. And every now and then, through its own inertia, the traffic will get moving again, and you sort of roll on for a little bit, but then, you'll stop again. But there are places you can get off and navigate around it. You just have to figure it out.
Right. So what are the most common mistakes that companies make on the digital transformation journey?
Well, the first one I find is that they view digital as a product. So they'll go out and buy something, or they'll buy a suite of something. And, it's kind of a two-pronged mistake. The first one is, digital is this product. We bought the product. Now we have this digital side of us. And so then there's this other side of us. And that's a big one. And then the second one is that it gets sort of relegated or pigeonholed into this area of the organization. And one of the things I say a lot in the book, I think, is that digital is a discipline, right? So it's not one product, it's not one person, it's not one department, it's everybody. I was just recently at a big event where I was speaking to a whole lot of credit unions, and I asked them, hey, who here has an Amazon account? And you'd be surprised. It was literally the whole room, as you might imagine, 99%. And I said, okay, now keep in mind that every one of these people works at a financial institution and is most likely fairly high up, or, at least a manager, if not a vice president or a supervisor or a board member even. And I said, okay, put your hands down. How many of you have your financial institution's debit and or credit card in Amazon as a payment platform? It might have been 10% of the room. That's out of 100% almost having Amazon. I guarantee you I could have gone through and done iTunes. I could have done those things. So even something as simple as sort of acknowledging the new world of digital, that, you know, we're no longer top of app, we're top of, or pardon me, we're no longer top of wallet, we're now top of app, is a difficult transition. And that's a culture issue. So to me, those are the biggest mistakes, is one, viewing it as a product, or pardon me, as a product and just sort of pigeonholing it. And two, not making sure that you eat your own dog food. You know, I'm sure you've heard the Outpost principle. Those are the two biggest mistakes I see.
Great. That actually helps me segue to the next question. How important is culture in an organization to getting this stuff done?
So I have this metaphor I like to use for culture. You know, right now, big is you know, it's big, paradoxically, is a small organization. It's not that huge, but I know our greatest issue is going to be basically spreading culture, right? So I like to think of it like this. If you dropped a little pebble into the middle of a pond, you know, it would ripple out from the center, right? With the strongest ripples being as close to the epicenter of where you drop the pebble, and it weakens as it rolls out towards the edges of the pond, right? And so that's how culture works, is it starts at the top. I mean, it starts in the center. The challenge is that as it, you know, disperses and gets further out, it gets weaker. And the further away from the center is, the weaker it gets. And so from a culture perspective, digital is really going to be something that we have to start thinking about first. And I'll give you some examples. I find that one of the things that we're woefully behind on in the middle-sized financial institutions is data analytics. So when you don't have data analytics, you tend to make decisions based on, you know, I call it this, you know, you're sort of, you know, just putting a finger in the air, but, you know, there's someone there who's fairly knowledgeable, but it's, you know, can you be sure that hasn't changed? So you start to make decisions based on conventional wisdom, right? So one of the conventional wisdoms is, well, gee, you know, 50% of our people use our branches. Is that really true? Because things change. And so as people go through it and start to understand culturally that we make decisions based on data, even the smallest decisions, as opposed to sort of interpretations or conventional wisdom, that starts to carry the day through the rest of the organization. But you've got to build a foundation on it. And that foundation is culturally. So even if you have the world's best data analytics platform, but people are still making assumptions in meetings and using that to, you know, to make decisions on, then your culture hasn't really proliferated its tools and what you need. And so that, combined with really creating, you know, a communication case for that. You know, in the book, I talk about HR. You know what the number one asset of any financial institution is? It's not its tech. Digital has nothing to do with tech, really, at the end of the day. It has to do with the people. People are the end-all, be-all. And you want to hear the worst part, Katie? You know who gets the most FaceTime, you know, with all of our customers is the least paid person in the organization, a teller. But if they're going to communicate with, and the call center people, if they're the ones talking to these people, who has the most insight on where they're at, how they're feeling, and who they are? But yet we don't really have that ripple. With that ripple effect, we really don't have this way of communicating that back to the center and being able to emanate that culture out from the center so that everybody feels it. You know, I talk about storytelling a little bit in the book, you know, the idea that, you know, something happened and there's sort of this lore or mythology. And with, I know this all sounds all kind of touchy-feely, but inside the organization, like, oh, remember that day when everything went down and Joe Blow stayed 12 hours to fix it or whatever. You know, that's culture to some extent, because that says, hey, this guy knew that this was important to the organization and we needed to deal with it. So culture is, you know, culture is related to people. Those two things are the number one things. You can have all the tech in the world, but people are the most important thing.
Well said. Often we hear talk of innovation departments, hackathons, and so forth, but can transformation truly take place if it is relegated to a specific business unit?
Yeah, that's, you know, so I like to say it like this. In the book, I've sort of put together a summation, right? You got to decide who you are. You're either a technology company that delivers financial services, or you're a financial services company that delivers technology. Brett would tell you, Mr. King would tell you that only one of those will win. But I think that there's room for both in the model. And so let me kind of explain one or the other. USAA, fantastic organization. No, zero branches, well, they have a few, but nothing to speak of, considering their size and what they produce. But those guys are organized like a technology company. They have agile, they have programmers, they have the tools to do this. Whereas if you look at someone like, no, that's not the world's best, example. I feel like Umpqua really has been using their technology provider and focusing on their financial services. In other words, they're sort of beholding to this technology provider to provide sort of this continuum of channels and services and how everything works together. Whereas organized as a technology company like USAA, hey, those guys built their take a picture of a check thing. Like, they're not afraid to go out and build these new services that the customers want. So, between those two things, what you see is that even if you have a hackathon and it happens in a small department somewhere, depending on which kind of organization you are. So in the technology organization, let's say somebody comes up with something cool, there's somewhere to go with that. Like, okay, that might be able to work its way into the service book, become a service that customers can use. And keep in mind, hackathons and things like that don't always have to be focused on member or customer facing tools. Sometimes they can be focused on internal processes, which can make a huge difference in an organization. So those are two different things. I'm kind of going from the member facing or the customer facing, because from my perspective, that's all I care about. That's what I want, for people, is to produce more services and a better experience for their customers from a financial perspective. But the other side of it is if you build something, have this hackathon, and it's just in one department, it's got nowhere to go. It doesn't have a place to go live. There would be no discipline in place to circulate how it works. We'd be back to that issue that we talked about culturally, where not everybody's using the credit cards or the services of the organization that they work at. And as a result, the likelihood that would become something that would be out there for everyone to use is very low. And so that's why I keep, you'll hear me beat this horse to death, but it's got to be everyone everywhere all the time. That's the only way to really, approach this from the top down.
Great. In the banking space specifically, we have a ton of legacy architecture and systems. How do you innovate on top of a stack that is 30 years old?
Oh gosh. Well, in the Canadian space, we have 30 years old is young. That's like a new system for us, right? 30 years old puts it in the 90s. We got stuff that was built in the 80s. But yet some of the coolest things that I've ever seen have come out of organizations building on top of these old systems. I'll speak specifically about Jack Henry and Associates, which they have a system that was built in the 80s called Scimitar. The key is to recognize that these systems that are 30 years old provide a purpose, and they're usually very, very good at it. Where we make our mistakes is when we try to, use that system to be something else, as opposed to using it what it was intended for. So if you have a DDA system that's focused on GLs and those sorts of things, use it for what it's worth. If you need to surround it with something new, then you can add on to that. And in today's world, we live in such a cool time. We live in what I call peanut butter and chocolate, right? I had some friends when I first started doing security for banks and was working on putting in our first firewalls. I met descendants of H.B. Reese. Do you know who H.B. Reese is?
No.
So Reese's Pieces, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, right? And I remember looking at his logo on the screen, and it was the actual Reese's logo. And I said, dude, you're going to get sued. And he said, dude, no, I'm not, because I am a family member and I'm allowed to use that logo. And I talked to him and I said, well, tell me the story, man. This sounds awesome. Well, this guy didn't invent chocolate and he didn't invent peanut butter. But what he did do was he figured out how to put them together. Well, we have all kinds of things like that. There's all these incredible tools out there that, you look at the AI tools that are coming up. You look at, services like Twilio, where now more than ever, we have the opportunity to go out and take this peanut butter and sort of mix it with our chocolate. Now, I do know that there are people who go, yeah, but our host is 30 years old and the vendor doesn't really want to do anything. To that, I say, that's really on you. You know, if you've chosen the path of sort of being dependent on this vendor, then it's incumbent upon you to get on their boards, on their advisory boards, to be partners with them. Because I can tell you, there is no vendor out there, even with a 30-year-old system, that wants to sit on, you know, back in their laurels and just hang where they are. They all want to move forward. And, you know, if you're just going to hang out on the sidelines and complain, you're complicit in the issue as well. So you've got to get in there, mix it up, be involved. Now, if you do all that and it doesn't move, maybe it's time to move elsewhere. But I find most of them are very receptive when you get involved and really push forward with them.
Now, what impact is FinTech having on credit unions and community banks?
Well, the biggest impact is sort of the unbundling of services, right? So what a FinTech does, rightly so, is they'll focus on a very specific sort of, I'll call it a very specific line of business or a very specific business case within a community bank or a credit union. So, take for example, there's a great organization called Acorns. Acorn is a top-off function. So like, for example, if you buy something for $5.36, it's going to take and put 64 cents, I'm trying to get the math right, into your account to bring it up to that, $6. It's going to put that into a 401k or something. I'll often say, hey, at a meeting where I'm speaking, I'll say, who has Acorn? And nobody will raise their hand. And I'll say, well, that's wrong. Raise your hands, because they've been able to work their way into these organizations without having to have a relationship with the financial institutions. That said, I can tell you from talking to their group a couple of years ago, they're very interested in having these relationships. They'd rather be part of your world than not. So when you look at these unbundling of services, and I like to use the idea of, say a Six Sigma company like Southwest, right? So Southwest is really good at one thing. They sell tickets to planes, right? Now there's more to it than that, but at the end of the day, you want to go from Dallas, to Boston, Southwest is going to get you there, right? Mm-hmm. But when you think about a financial institution, they really have a difficult row to hoe, right? On one case, they're sort of serving this debit credit card kind of experience where it's constant balances and looking at what you have. Then you have like a whole nother experience, like a loan, which is a whole different model. And then on top of that, you've got sort of a mortgage experience. You may have a wallet experience. You have all these things that are very different from each other. And what the financial institutions have been endeavoring to do for a long time is to create an experience that is consistent across all these. But the challenge is that, you wind up sort of at the least common denominator when you're trying to deal with mortgages, with auto lending, with credit card lending, with balances and services and all these things. And so you wind up sort of with a watered down approach. And oftentimes each of those are different vendors. Whereas a FinTech says, well, we're not going to use a vendor for this. We're also going to just focus on just this. And there is no expectation of the customer that they're going to be doing these other things. So I like it like this. You ever go into Walmart and they got like a nail shop, and then they also have like a bank up front and a Subway and like, 8 other things up front. That's kind of what we are. We're kind of like the back of a Winnebago, right? There's lots of stickers all over the place that we're trying to incorporate. Whereas, these guys are laser focused on one process. And by doing that, they get the best of best. And what it comes down to is this. In the digital world, you get compared to other things that you would never get compared to in the physical world. What I mean by that is no one rolls into a Starbucks, looks around and goes, you know what? I wish my bank or credit union looked like this. I wish that they would operate more like this, right? But online, if someone encounters a cool way to do a transfer, or maybe they're in PayPal or one of these other products where they put a lot of effort into the ACH part of it, and now you're using your financial institution's ACH inside their home banking, and you're going, wow, that was way bad compared to what PayPal did over here. Or even worse yet, Starbucks for topping off a card. So you can, in a digital world, be compared to competitors who are far outside your peers. And as a result of that, the bar is raised really high. So that's kind of what I see, is that there's continued unbundling and dissection. And the worst part is I feel like they all want to partner. And it comes back to your previous question of how do you deal with these 30-year-old systems? And that's the nut you have to crack, because you have to build something around it that allows them to come in. Because if they come in and go, okay, we're ready to connect, and you go, all right, let's go, wake up old Jessup, the old box that we got over here that's been running for 30 years. Well, how do I connect to it? Well, have you ever heard of a language called, this or that, or Fortran? And they're like, nah, man, I'm 20 years old. That doesn't even sound like a language to me. Pascal, that's a French philosopher. What are you talking about? But yet that's what we have in our world. And so we've got to cross those culture barriers and bring those things together. And there's more to it than that. You look at financial institutions and their HR perspective, and, just the idea of working from home, which is a foreign concept in a lot of financial institutions. Like, oh, well, we can't track people that work from home, whereas, in their world, they might be working out of the back of a caboose on a train. They don't care. And they're very productive. So we've got a lot of cultural issues to overcome as well to engage those guys.
Excellent. So where can we learn more about your book, Breaking Digital Gridlock?
Why, Katie, there's lots of places you can learn about my book. So you can go to www.breakingdigitalgridlock.com, and there's a button there that will take you to like all the different places. I found some Norwegian book website it was on the other day. It doesn't look like it's been translated to Norwegia, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but it has all of them there. Obviously, it's on Amazon, it's Kindle, it's on Kobo. There's plenty to see there. I think you can get sample pages. If you need to know more, you can reach out to me. You can hit me on Twitter at JBFinTech, and certainly love to talk to anybody about it. It's been really a work of love. I like to say it like this: every band gets their entire life to write their first album. And this book sort of has been coming, from my perspective for a long time. It's the second one that's hard, that sophomore album. But you have your entire life to write this first one, and that's certainly what this is really my views as sort of living in that world, and really it's more of a how-to and less of a you should.
Great. Well, thank you for coming on today. It was excellent talking about FinTech and the future of financial services.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And look forward to having you back on soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Very welcome. All right. Bye.
Bye.